D, I. So, okay. D is an independent clause, D is a dependent clause, I is an independent clause. Come on. And the, what's interesting about this sentence, and well, there's two interesting things about it. One thing being, more of that. Okay. One thing being that I found it in poetry a lot. That's actually why I snagged it. Now we're talking about prose, obviously, so poetry doesn't work out quite so well for that. But one thing I kind of noticed is that poetry helps you remember things. And if the sentence fits really well into, poetry, it kind of follows to me anyway, this is what helps you remember. The sentence is useful for helping you remember things. And kind of in line with that is what the book described, the purpose of the sentence. The sentence is good for special locations, for special places. And one of the important uses they have for it was summarizing main points in a thesis or in a conclusion. So for example, you have a paragraph, and this paragraph has a collection of main points, and all of these main points lead to one logical conclusion. So I think my sentence was, whether Napoleon actually believed in the revolution or whether he was just using the French Revolution to give himself power, his reign led to the spread of ideals all across Europe. Now, in that sentence, the two dependent clauses would be, I'm going to show you. Yes, okay. Sentence pattern. I have no transitions, by the way, so where's the play? Fine. Okay, I'm going to do this. Okay, so these are 2 or 3 dependent clauses, and really quickly, does anybody remember what a dependent clause, well, first of all, what is a clause? Start with a clause. Louder.
It has a subject and a verb.
It has a subject and a verb, right. Now, an independent clause is a subject and a verb, but it expresses a complete thought. You can have an independent clause standing by itself. What about a dependent clause? Can you do that with a no, you can't. So in my sentence, up here, here's one of the clauses. What is the subject of this clause? Napoleon, right. And what is the verb? Believed, right. But can I simply say whether Napoleon truly believed in revolutionary ideals?
No.
No, because that whether, right here, this implies there is more to the thought. So, and it's the same thing with this second sentence right here. And both of these, in this case, they're kind of contradictory, right? One of them says one thing, the other one says the other thing. But both of them lead to this. And here is the independent clause. You could simply say, he was instrumental in spreading Enlightenment ideals around Europe, right? That's a complete thought. Now, here's another one, I guess. This is supposed to be more poetic. Before I learned to write, before I learned to read, even before I learned to speak, I had to learn to listen. I don't know whether that's technically true or not, but it's kind of supposed to be emotional, I guess. So really quickly, can I have somebody identify one of the dependent clauses?
Before I learned to write.
Before I learned to write. What's another one?
Before I learned to read.
Before I learned to read, and because this is so difficult at this point, what's the last one?
Before I learned to speak.
Before I learned to speak, right. And where is the independent clause? It's all that's left. I had to learn to listen. Right. Now, that is that sentence in a nutshell, all by itself. But here's what it looks like, I guess, in context. Now, I wrote the Napoleon sentence, so I didn't have paragraphs to go before it. But here's an example of how it might be kind of useful. You have a paragraph here about Napoleon's non-revolutionary things, which kind of connects with this clause right here. And then you would have a paragraph about Napoleon's actually revolutionary things, things that were in keeping with the French Revolution, and that will connect with this one right here. And then you have another sentence, or another paragraph here, that connects to this independent clause. It's a type of transition. Now, the book does mention that this is, in fact, a way to summarize main points. So what's being summarized in here? It's these two paragraphs right back here, right? These two clauses are summarizing this previous paragraph. But in this case, it's being used, interestingly enough, not to summarize an entire paper, but to transition into another part of the paper. Here's what it's transitioning into. It's kind of a nice way of changing topics. Now, here we have some examples in text. And this one comes from Mark Twain. And I highlighted the sentence, so you should be able to see it. But could I maybe get somebody to tell me kind of what it's doing here? Like, what is the sentence's purpose in this overall text? So take a minute to think about it.
Which sentence? The bolded one?
The bolded one, right. You can kind of see, well, first of all, in the bolded one, what's the first independent clause? What's the independent clause?
Now when I had mastered the language of this water.
Is it? No.
Sorry, did you say the independent?
Sorry, the independent clause. Sorry. I started off with first, so that was probably misleading. So what's the, yeah?
The last sentence, I had made a valuable acquisition.
I have made a valuable acquisition, right. Where are the two dependent clauses? And they're a little bit misleading. In the second one, the subject is implied. It's not actually stated. But this was in the Art of Styling Sentences, so I figured it was good to go. Like, no, seriously, that's where I found this from. So, where's the first independent, or the first dependent clause? Anybody?
Now when I had mastered.
No, and I had mastered, right. And then the other one would be right here. Anne had come to know, yada yada. And you can kind of see the I is implied, right? So
Well, they stated after as I knew the letters of the alphabet.
true.
It just doesn't come first.
It is right. That's a good point. Maybe okay. I see your point. I think that would depend on what is the main verb in the second clause. Maybe. It's either, I mean, that might be an adverbial.
Probably knows the main verb.
Yeah. Yeah. And had come to know, I would expect. But that's something to think about. I'll have to get back to that. Anyway, but the sentence overall, what is it doing in the overall text, in the big picture of the text?
It's saying how much he learned.
It's saying how much he learned, and what is it then doing? It's transitioning, right? Does everybody, so here, he's talking back here, he has like paragraphs and paragraphs talking about how he learned to read the Mississippi, right? This is his last skill that he learned. And this is right here, summarizing it. He's summarizing it. And then of course he transitions into the alternative. But again, this is a summary. And again, as I mentioned, one of the things with a summary is it's supposed to be the things you're able to walk away with and remember, right? This is what we do in our papers, is we want our conclusions to be what our reader's last impression is. So here's the last impression you're getting, essentially, of all this stuff. It's a lot longer than that, by the way. I abbreviated it. So that is what that sentence looks like in text. And now what I thought we could do, in order to write them, and incidentally, this is where your funnel is going to become kind of handy, so hang on to that. What I thought we would do, because this has to have important information in it, right? Specific information. You're taking the specific information from other parts of the text. I thought we would wind up inventing our own sentences based on somebody else's texts. And typically I would model this for you, but I thought I would let a far superior writer to myself model it for you instead. Are any of you familiar with The Highwayman by Alfred Noyes? No? It's a poem. It's a very long poem, kind of a lyrical ballad type poem. And it's about basically a highwayman, a robber, who falls in love with an innkeeper's daughter, and they all die, and it becomes a ghost story. But it has some of the most fabulous literary devices, including my all-time favorite metaphor, incidentally. This one right here. But as you can see, his first stanza of his poem, sentence right here, sort of thing. What he does over here, this is the second to last stanza, I think. All of a sudden, this becomes the sentence pattern. Because all of a sudden, you have, when the wind is in the trees, when the moon is a ghostly galleon, and when the road is a ribbon of moonlight. All of a sudden, they become one sentence with 3 dependent clauses. Okay, can I get like a thumbs up, sideways, down for how clear that is for everybody? Thumbs up, kind of, okay. Okay. So maybe it would help if I did it not in poetry. So let me show you. That is what it would look like if it's not in poetry. And that's kind of the big problem with that last thing, is we're supposed to be writing prose, but that was poetry. But this is basically that whole sentence. When the wind is in the trees, when the moon looks like a ghost ship, when the road is a ribbon of moonlight, highwayman comes riding. What is the independent clause?
Highwayman comes riding.
Highwayman comes riding. What is one dependent clause?
When the wind is in the trees.
When the wind is in the trees, right. The subject of when the wind is in the trees is wind, right? But because of the word when, it's not an independent sentence. So now we're going to do the same, with your funnel. To show you what it looks like, you would be writing shortened versions of independent clauses in these three arrows going in, right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So if I were doing the funnel with this one, it would be when the wind is in the trees, when the moon looks like a ghost ship, when the road is a ribbon, right? Okay. In here, this would be an independent clause, if that makes any sense. And then the end here would be the entire sentence. So let's look back, or let's look forward, I should say. This is a text. How many of you have read Emma by Jane Austen? Yeah. It is my favorite of her books. But anyway, we have it here, a section of text, which could be kind of turned into this sentence. And what I'd like you to do is, using your funnel, try to find in here three independent clauses, or three dependent clauses and one independent clause, if you can, out of this text. And when you're done, when you have it written out, kind of flip over your paper so I can see that you're done. Okay. Can you see that? Would it help if I try to make it bigger? I'm not sure I can.
I think it's okay.
Alright, so
That's how you do it. Okay, is that easier for everybody to see?
So are we building
Yes.
dependent, making it, and then
Yeah.
dependent, okay.
Like this right
From
here.
over there, okay.
Dependent, 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 independent.
We're doing that.
Yes.
Something.
Exactly. You don't say it switched to full screen. And you don't have to put like the entire thing on the paper, just enough so that you know what your thoughts are, if that makes any sense. How much time do I have?
about 2 minutes.
So I can't switch it around.
But this is switched around.
Well, it can be,
Uh-huh.
but dependent, 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 independent is still the structure I was talking about. Other things you can do with it. Now, the reason I picked this chunk of text, by the way, is that the movie Emma, the one with Gwyneth Paltrow and Jeremy Northam and all that, it does this. It basically makes this sentence pattern kind of close to that sentence pattern out of this whole wall of text. And I thought it would be kind of fun, if we have our time, to play the clip and see if students could come up with a reason for why. Maybe why this makes sense specifically in Emma, but why in another context it would make sense to have all of this be in one sentence. So has anybody kind of come up with a sentence for this yet? Julia.
Were she a woman of fortune, and were she prosperous, and were she your equal in
Situation.
My scribble. I